Theodore Roosevelt Jr., the eldest son of the former U.S. president, became one of the most inspiring figures of the Second World War by leading from the front when few expected him to even be on the battlefield. Born in 1887, he had already served in the First World War and built a reputation for courage. But by 1944, he was plagued by arthritis and heart problems so severe that he walked with a cane. Despite his health, Roosevelt insisted on taking part in the Normandy invasion, requesting command of a unit that would land in the first wave. His superiors hesitated, fearing he was too frail, but his determination convinced them. On June 6, 1944, he landed with the 4th Infantry Division on Utah Beach in one of the most dangerous operations of the war. Once ashore, Roosevelt demonstrated exactly why he belonged there. Finding that his troops had drifted off course and landed nearly 2 kilometers from their planned zone, he calmly declared, "We'll start the war from right here." His presence, calmness, and quick decision-making turned what could have been a disastrous misstep into a success. He moved along the beach with his cane, organizing scattered units and personally leading men through German defenses. Soldiers who might have panicked instead found confidence in seeing a general old enough to be many of their fathers moving steadily among them, without fear. Roosevelt's leadership was not limited to courage. It was his ability to inspire trust and maintain control in chaos that made him remarkable. The landings at Utah Beach ultimately suffered fewer casualties than expected, in no small part thanks to his direction on the ground. For his actions that day, he was awarded the Medal of Honor, a recognition of both his personal bravery and his ability to steady thousands of men in the midst of battle. Tragically, only weeks after Normandy, Roosevelt passed away from a heart attack, but his legacy was already sealed. His example showed that true leadership was not measured by physical strength, but by resolve, presence, and the ability to inspire others when it mattered most. To his soldiers, he was the embodiment of courage, an officer who shared their risks and proved that even in frailty, greatness could shine.
Louis Chesty Puller, the most decorated Marine in American history, became a living legend in the Pacific War, embodying toughness, determination, and unshakable confidence in his men. Born in 1898 in Virginia, Puller had already built a reputation as a battle-hardened officer from service in Central America and the Caribbean during the so-called Banana Wars. By the time the Second World War erupted, he was a seasoned Marine officer, respected for his strict discipline and admired for always sharing the dangers of his troops. When the United States launched its island-hopping campaign, Puller was at the center of some of the fiercest battles against the Japanese. His first major test came on Guadalcanal in 1942. The campaign was brutal, fought in sweltering jungles against an enemy that refused to give ground easily. Puller's leadership shone during desperate moments, such as the night battle along the Matanikau River, when his Marines held off repeated Japanese attacks, inflicting devastating losses. He became famous for inspiring lines, once declaring, "We're surrounded. That simplifies our problem." This type of grit captured the spirit of the Marines and gave his men the courage to push through situations that seemed hopeless. Puller later commanded Marine regiments at Cape Gloucester and Peleliu, 2 campaigns that tested the endurance of even the toughest soldiers. His relentless drive, combined with his absolute faith in the Marine Corps ethos of never giving up, helped his men survive in conditions that broke others. Though the battles were costly, his ability to maintain morale and discipline under extreme pressure cemented his reputation as the Marines' Marine. What set Puller apart was not just his tactical ability, but his bond with his troops. He lived among them, knew their hardships, and demanded the best while never asking anything he would not do himself. His men revered him because they saw in him the embodiment of their own struggle, unyielding, defiant, and unbreakable. By the war's end, his name had become synonymous with the fighting spirit of the Marine Corps. Puller's legacy carried on long after the Second World War, but his actions in the Pacific made him legendary. He was the warrior who turned impossible odds into rallying cries, the general whose toughness inspired generations, and the symbol of marine determination in the most unforgiving battles of the Pacific.
Guy Simonds, one of Canada's most skilled generals of the Second World War, built his reputation as a brilliant planner and innovator during the campaigns in Northwest Europe. Born in England in 1903 and raised in Canada, Simonds was relatively young for a corps commander when he took charge of 2nd Canadian Corps in 1944. Despite his age, he quickly proved himself a thoughtful, determined leader who combined careful preparation with bold execution. His methods were not always conventional, but they often delivered results at critical moments of the war. Simonds' most famous contribution came during the Battle of Normandy. After the Allied breakout from the beaches stalled against German defenses, he was given responsibility for Operation Totalize, an offensive south of Caen in August 1944. Knowing that the Germans were strong in anti-tank weapons and that night fighting could reduce their advantage, Simonds innovated by mounting infantry in armored carriers, converted from Sherman tanks, to advance quickly in darkness alongside heavy bombing runs. Though the operation achieved only partial success, it marked one of the earliest examples of modern mechanized infantry tactics. He followed this with Operation Tractable, which contributed to closing the Falaise pocket and trapping thousands of German troops. These actions were vital to breaking German resistance in France and set the stage for the Allied advance into Belgium and the Netherlands. Simonds also played a crucial role in the Battle of the Scheldt, directing operations to clear the approaches to Antwerp. This grueling campaign, fought through flooded terrain and well-defended positions, was essential for opening a major port to Allied supply lines. Although sometimes criticized for being distant and lacking warmth with his soldiers, Simonds gained respect for his clear thinking and willingness to experiment with new ideas. His ability to adapt under pressure made him one of Canada's most effective commanders. By the end of the war, he was seen as a man who had not only served his country, but also contributed innovations that shaped modern combined arms warfare. Simonds' legacy lies in his reputation as Canada's most gifted battlefield general, an officer who blended intellect, innovation, and determination to overcome formidable challenges in one of the most difficult theaters of the war.
Henry Crerar, commander of the 1st Canadian Army, was one of the most important Canadian leaders of the Second World War, guiding his country's largest field force through some of the toughest campaigns in Northwest Europe. Born in Hamilton, Ontario in 1888, Crerar was a professional soldier with a calm, diplomatic style that made him well-suited to coalition warfare. Unlike more flamboyant generals, he emphasized teamwork, coordination, and steady progress, qualities that proved vital in the complex Allied structure of 1944 to 45. Crerar took command of the 1st Canadian Army during the Normandy campaign, where Canadian troops played a major role in the grueling battles around Caen. Under his leadership, they contributed to the eventual breakout that forced German forces into retreat. His army later fought in the clearing of the Scheldt estuary, a critical but costly operation that opened the port of Antwerp and ensured the Allies could sustain their advance into Germany. These battles were brutal, fought through flooded lowlands and heavily defended positions, but Crerar's insistence on thorough preparation helped his forces endure. What set Crerar apart was his ability to balance a military necessity with political importance. He understood that Canada's national contribution had to be visible and meaningful, and he ensured Canadian forces were at the forefront of key operations. Though not considered a bold battlefield genius, his skill as a coalition leader and his determination to give Canada a prominent role secured him respect. By the war's end, Crerar had commanded one of the largest armies in Allied service, symbolizing Canada's emergence as a significant power on the world stage. His legacy was that of a steady, dependable commander whose leadership helped secure victory while giving his nation a central place in the Allied cause.
Omar Bradley, often called the GI's general, was the American commander most closely identified with the ordinary soldier, leading with a calm, measured style that won him respect across the Allied armies. Born in 1893 in Missouri, Bradley rose through the ranks with little of the flamboyance of Patton or MacArthur, but his reliability and steady character made him indispensable. By 1944, he commanded the U.S. First Army during the Normandy invasion, directing one of the largest armies ever assembled. At D-Day, Bradley oversaw the landings on Omaha and Utah beaches, where American forces faced brutal resistance. His careful planning, combined with his determination to adapt under pressure, helped secure the beachheads despite heavy losses. Once ashore, Bradley expanded his command to the 12th Army Group, which eventually became the largest U.S. formation in history, fielding over 1 million men as it advanced across France and into Germany. Bradley's leadership was marked by prudence and an emphasis on minimizing unnecessary risks. In contrast to Patton's aggressive style, Bradley preferred thorough preparation and steady advances, a method well suited to managing such vast forces. He played a central role in the breakout from Normandy during Operation Cobra, which unleashed the rapid Allied drive across France. Later, during the Battle of the Bulge, his calm coordination ensured American forces held firm under immense German pressure until reinforcements arrived. Though sometimes overshadowed by more dramatic personalities, Bradley's importance cannot be overstated. He had the rare ability to manage massive armies, work smoothly with British and Canadian allies, and maintain the trust of the soldiers he commanded. To the men in the field, he seemed approachable and genuinely concerned for their welfare. Bradley's legacy is that of a commander whose quiet professionalism delivered consistent results. He was not a general of theatrics, but of competence and trust, and his leadership was a vital element in the Allied victory in Europe.
Carl Gustav Emil Mannerheim, Finland's commander-in-chief during the Second World War, was a statesman-soldier whose leadership helped his small nation survive between the two giants of Germany and the Soviet Union. Born in 1867 into an aristocratic family of Swedish-Finnish origin, Mannerheim had served for decades in the Russian Imperial Army before Finland gained independence in 1917. His long experience, calm authority, and reputation for integrity made him the natural choice to lead Finland during its most perilous years. When the Soviet Union invaded in 1939, Mannerheim oversaw Finland's defense in the Winter War. Though heavily outnumbered, Finnish forces used the forests and snow to devastating effect, inflicting massive losses and stunning the world with their resilience. While the war ended with territorial concessions, Mannerheim's leadership gave Finland international respect and strengthened national unity. In 1941, when Germany invaded the Soviet Union, Finland entered what became known as the Continuation War. Mannerheim accepted German support, but refused to let Finland become a mere satellite of Hitler's regime. His strategy was pragmatic: hold defensive lines, recover lost territory, and avoid unnecessary entanglement in Germany's broader war aims. He resisted German pressure to attack Leningrad and preserved Finland's independence of action, a delicate balancing act that demanded both caution and resolve. By 1944, as the Soviets launched massive offensives, Mannerheim personally directed the defense at battles like Tali-i-Hantala, where Finnish forces halted the Soviet advance in one of the largest battles in Nordic history. Realizing the war could not be sustained, he guided Finland to negotiate an armistice with Moscow, even though this meant turning against German troops still in Finland. His ability to manage this transition without civil collapse highlighted his political as well as military skill. Mannerheim's legacy is that of a national savior. He kept Finland from occupation, preserved its independence, and emerged as both a respected general and, later, president. For Finns, he symbolized unity, resilience, and the wisdom of measured leadership in the face of overwhelming odds.
Karel Janoušek, the only Czech air marshal in history, became a symbol of his nation's determination to fight on after Nazi occupation. Born in 1893, he had served in the First World War and built a career in the Czechoslovak Air Force between the wars. When Germany dismantled Czechoslovakia in 1939, Janoušek refused to accept defeat. He escaped through Poland and France, eventually reaching Britain, where he became the leading figure coordinating Czech pilots who had joined the Royal Air Force. Under his leadership, Czechoslovak squadrons played a vital role in the Battle of Britain, where their skill and determination earned admiration. These pilots, many of whom had lost their homeland, fought with a ferocity that made them stand out among the RAF. Janoušek worked tirelessly to ensure they were not only integrated into British formations, but also recognized as fighting for the liberation of their own nation. His organizational skills and diplomacy helped maintain morale and unity among exiled Czechs serving far from home. Janoušek's efforts extended beyond administration. He was a passionate advocate for his men, frequently visiting squadrons, sharing their hardships, and reminding them that every mission was a step toward reclaiming their country. By 1941, he was formally recognized by the British government as Inspector of the Czechoslovak Air Force in Exile, an unprecedented honor that elevated his position to Air Marshal. Though his forces were small compared to larger Allied nations, Janoušek's contribution lay in keeping the Czech struggle alive on the world stage. He ensured that Czechoslovakia remained a visible part of the Allied cause, reminding Britain and its partners that this was not just a war of great powers, but also of smaller nations determined to survive. After the war, Janoušek returned to his homeland hoping for recognition, but the communist regime viewed him with suspicion. He was imprisoned for years, only rehabilitated decades later. Yet his wartime legacy endures. He was the leader who gave displaced soldiers a mission, and his name remains tied to the bravery of Czech pilots who fought for freedom in foreign skies.
Giovanni Messe was widely regarded as Italy's most competent general of the Second World War, a commander who earned respect from both his allies and his adversaries for his professionalism and pragmatic approach to warfare. Born in 1883, Messe had already built a distinguished career in the First World War and in Italy's colonial campaigns. By the time Mussolini aligned Italy with Germany, Messe was one of the few Italian officers who openly doubted the wisdom of joining a global conflict without proper preparation. In North Africa, Messe initially served under German command, but quickly distinguished himself. Unlike many Italian leaders, he recognized the limitations of his army and worked tirelessly to improve training, logistics, and morale. In 1943, he took command of the Italian First Army in Tunisia, facing overwhelming Allied pressure. Though heavily outnumbered and undersupplied, Messe organized a disciplined defense that impressed even the Germans. His army fought stubbornly, delaying the inevitable and earning him the admiration of his opponents, who noted his ability to maintain order under impossible conditions. When Tunisia finally fell, Messe was taken prisoner, but his reputation as a capable and honorable soldier endured. What truly set Messe apart was his loyalty to his country rather than to ideology. After Italy switched sides in September 1943, he accepted a new command under the co-belligerent government, leading Italian forces that fought alongside the Allies against Germany. This shift highlighted his adaptability and his focus on Italy's long-term survival rather than personal ambition. His career thus spanned both sides of the conflict, a rare distinction that underscored his pragmatism. After the war, Messe transitioned into politics, eventually becoming chief of staff of the Italian army and later serving in government. Unlike many contemporaries, his reputation remained largely intact, with historians and veterans alike recognizing him as Italy's finest general of the era. Messe's legacy rests on his professionalism, realism, and refusal to be blinded by ideology. In a military often undermined by poor leadership, he stood out as a general who commanded with integrity and skill, proving that even in a flawed system, true competence could shine through.
Chiang Kai-shek, Generalissimo of Nationalist China and Allied Supreme Commander of the China Theater, led a country at war while holding together a fragile coalition of regional armies and political rivals. After full-scale conflict with Japan erupted in 1937, he chose a strategy of defense in depth, trading space for time, shifting the government to Chongqing while trying to wear down the invader. Costly stands at Shanghai and later Wuhan slowed Japan's advance, and the prolonged resistance compelled Tokyo to station vast forces in China, tying down men and materiel that could not be used elsewhere. Chiang's leadership hinged on diplomacy as much as battlefield command. He maintained the uneasy united front with the communists against Japan, even as mistrust simmered. He cultivated Western support, appearing beside Roosevelt and Churchill at the Cairo Conference in 1943 to signal China's place among the major allies. Lend-Lease supplies, the risky hump airlift over the Himalayas, and the reopening of ground links through Burma were lifelines for his armies and his people. Relations with U.S. General Joseph Stilwell grew strained over priorities and control, but Chiang replaced him with Albert Wiedemeyer, who focused on training, logistics, and a more realistic operational tempo. In Burma and along the Salween Front, Chinese forces, some trained and equipped under Allied programs, helped seize Midikina and restore a land route to China, improving the flow of supplies for the final phase of the war. Yet 1944 brought crisis. Japan's Operation Ichigo overran key rail corridors and airfields in central China, exposing weaknesses in command cohesion and logistics. Even so, by 1945, with Japan overstretched, Chiang's reorganized units helped reclaim territory and accepted Japanese surrenders across China.
Zhu Dai, commander of the Chinese Red Army and later the 8th Route Army, was one of the central figures in China's resistance against Japan during the Second World War. Born in 1886, Zhu had been a revolutionary soldier since the early 20th century, serving as a key ally of Mao Zedong in building the communist military forces. By the time of the Japanese invasion, his leadership and organizational skills had turned poorly armed rural fighters into a disciplined force capable of waging long campaigns. When the uneasy united front between nationalists and communists was formed in 1937, Zhu's forces were formally integrated into the Chinese war effort as the 8th Route Army, though they largely operated independently. Zhu emphasized guerrilla warfare, harassing supply lines, ambushing Japanese patrols, and mobilizing local populations to resist occupation. These tactics did not deliver spectacular battles, but steadily eroded Japanese control in the countryside. By 1940, the 100 Regiments Offensive, coordinated under Zhu's authority, showed that communist forces could mount large-scale operations, damaging railways, bridges, and outposts across northern China. Zhu's leadership style was pragmatic and people-focused. He insisted on strict discipline toward civilians, earning popular support in contrast to other armies that often exploited local communities. This approach expanded communist influence and laid the foundation for their eventual rise in post-war China. At the same time, Zhu maintained a careful balance with Mao, providing military expertise while deferring to Mao's political direction, ensuring unity in the communist camp during the war. Though his forces lacked the heavy equipment of the nationalists or allies, Zhu's armies tied down large numbers of Japanese troops and prevented them from fully consolidating their gains. By the war's end, Zhu's role had been pivotal in ensuring communist survival and growth. His legacy is not of sweeping battlefield victories, but of resilience, strategy, and building a people's army that would later become the foundation of the People's Liberation Army, central to China's future.
Rodolfo Graziani, one of Mussolini's most prominent marshals, became notorious for his role in Italy's campaigns in North Africa, where his failures highlighted the weaknesses of Italian strategy. Born in 1882, he had already made a name in colonial wars in Libya and Ethiopia, where his harsh methods earned him a reputation as a ruthless enforcer of fascist power. When Italy entered the Second World War in 1940, Graziani was placed in charge of the Italian 10th Army in Libya, tasked with advancing into British-controlled Egypt. At first, his forces moved across the border, occupying the small town of Sidi Barrani, but Graziani hesitated to push further. He was well aware of his disadvantages: outdated equipment, poor supply lines, and low morale among his troops. This caution soon turned disastrous. In December 1940, the British launched Operation Compass, a daring counteroffensive with far fewer troops.
Graziani's forces collapsed under the pressure, suffering one of the most humiliating defeats of the war, as tens of thousands of Italian soldiers were captured. Mussolini replaced Graziani, but his reputation never recovered. Later in the war, he held administrative posts, including leading fascist forces in northern Italy after 1943, yet he never again commanded in major operations. His name became associated with Italy's failures rather than successes. Graziani's legacy is one of controversy. A loyal fascist and symbol of Italy's early defeats, remembered more for his brutal colonial policies and military setbacks than for any battlefield triumph.
Italo Gariboldi, another of Mussolini's senior commanders, played key roles in both North Africa and the Eastern Front, though like many Italian generals, he struggled under poor conditions and limited resources. Born in 1879, Gariboldi was a career officer who rose steadily through the ranks, earning a reputation as a loyal and dependable soldier rather than a bold strategist. When the Second World War broke out, Mussolini placed him in high commands, often stepping in to replace others after failures. In North Africa, Gariboldi took command of Italian forces following Graziani's disastrous defeat in Operation Compass. He worked closely with German allies, though relations were often strained. When Rommel arrived in 1941, Gariboldi was officially his superior, but in practice he deferred to the German field marshal, recognizing Rommel's greater tactical skill. His willingness to cooperate, even at the expense of his own authority, allowed the Axis to stabilize the situation temporarily, though Italian forces remained heavily dependent on German leadership. Gariboldi's next major assignment came on the Eastern Front. In 1942, he commanded the Italian Eighth Army, deployed along the Don River as part of Germany's campaign towards Stalingrad. His army was overstretched and poorly equipped for the harsh Russian winter. When the Soviets launched Operation Uranus and Little Saturn, Italian lines crumbled under the assault of tanks and artillery, leading to massive losses. Despite his efforts to maintain order, Gariboldi could not prevent disaster, and the remnants of his army were destroyed or forced into retreat. After the fall of Mussolini in 1943, Gariboldi was briefly imprisoned by the Germans but later released. He spent the remainder of the war largely in obscurity, far from the spotlight of his earlier commands. Gariboldi's legacy is that of a dutiful officer caught in circumstances beyond his control. He was not a visionary general, but his loyalty and professionalism kept him in high positions. Ultimately, his career illustrates the broader struggles of Italy's military in the Second World War. Committed but underprepared, often overshadowed by stronger allies and unable to match the demands of a global conflict.